We're here with Stephen Merchant, one of the greats. I mean, come on. I don't think I've even said that on the show before. One of the greats.
Oh, only one of the greats.
No, you think there's only one great? What a cruel response to throw it back. It back at me as
the British can't take compliments. We cannot take a compliment.
Stephen the Great. We're joined by Stephen the Great.
Now I sound like a dictator.
No, that somehow feels like a British stand-up comedy persona.
It's true, isn't it?
You know what I mean? I can imagine someone touring.
I come on dressed like Henry VIII.
Yeah. I can imagine someone filling 240 seaters across the countryside in England. You are one of the greats, though. You've made some of the best television shows in the last 30 years, and you're very humble, and so you don't come with a big regalia and a big ego. You're very tall. I mean,
yes.
You're pushing 7 feet.
That's true. I am. Yes, yes.
But you're
so
not.
I loom over people.
You loom, but not in an aggressive way.
Oh well, that's nice of you to say.
But another person who you cast on Outlaws is Christopher Walkin, who looms also.
Do you think so? You mean physically looms?
No. Just his persona.
His persona, yes.
Is he off screen? Does he talk like that?
You mean with that sort of slightly staccato rhythm that he does on...
Sometimes when I pick up a mug, I drink it, and then sometimes I put it down.
No, he doesn't speak
I don't do
that
impressions,
way.
of course, but you get what I mean.
I do. No, he doesn't speak that way, but he is very reflective. And, he's
Okay.
a quiet man. I was asked... In order to get him for the show, I went up to Connecticut, where he lives, to meet with him. And I was a little intimidated, and he sort of lives in this nice place in the woods, and I kind of pulled up, and I was thinking, this is like somewhere that the door will be opened by a Hansel or a Gretel. And it was Christopher, and again, I can't do the impression either, but the first thing he said to me was, would you like some omelette? And he had just made an omelette very nicely, and he shared some omelette with me. But I was talking to, and someone had said to me before I met him, Christopher is very comfortable with silence. And that was a great piece of advice, because it meant that, I don't know whether you're one of those people who naturally feels the silence.
Right, yes.
And I feel obligated to do that. And
Yeah.
he, knowing that he was comfortable with it, meant I didn't do that. So he would ask a question, and I would answer, and he would just sort of muse on that. And then there'd be a long pause, and then he'd ask another question, I'd answer again, he'd pause. And it was a little bit like having a Zoom conversation in person.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There was a delay, and you weren't sure,
Yes.
is he thinking or buffering? But we got there, and I ended up being there for 3 hours, and it was a really interesting conversation, and he talked about people that he knew that were like the character in the show, and in the end I said, is there any more of that omelette? Because I've been there for like 3 hours, I was hungry.
Yeah.
But so he's quiet, he's thoughtful, he's reflective, but no, I think the reason he has that very idiosyncratic speech pattern is he's always trying to kind of keep the lines fresh, and like every take,
Yes.
he's always doing something slightly different, and so he'll talk about how he doesn't obey punctuation in scripts.
I've heard that,
yeah.
by the way. One of the more emphatic things that I've been taught in acting classes over the years is to immediately ignore all stage directions and punctuation.
Sure.
And I think it's a good tip.
Yeah. Except when you're writing a show and your actors are doing that. Then it's like, no, pay attention to the goddamn punctuation.
That's very funny. No, okay. I'm going to go... Well, first of all, you and I met when you were casting Hello Ladies.
Yes.
You thought I might be good for one of the parts.
And I still do.
Thank you very much. And then you were like, you should come read for this part. And more or less, more or less you were like, I think that it's going to be you.
Yeah.
And then I had to go through the network.
Yeah.
We won't name the network.
Sure.
People might be able to look that up.
You can look it up, yeah.
But the network said no dice on me.
But I think it was more... It was, looking back on it, I was very inexperienced about how the American process worked.
Yes,
Because I had done the UK, we'd done stuff in the UK where you could basically cast whoever. Like, no one, when we did The Office in the UK, I don't think we ever saw an executive. I mean, no one came down to the casting. No one looked at tapes. We just made the show.
We're all of us Americans who make things are so jealous of you even saying this.
And so by the time we came to make that, I thought it'd be the same. And the fact that there were hoops to jump through and people to show things to was completely confusing to me. And I think if I were more experienced now, I would know how to fight my corner, or I would know the process more.
Oh, interesting.
But at the time, I just didn't. It was all quite new to me, and I think I was sort of swept along, going, "Am I making the right choices here?" And I didn't have, I'd made stuff with Ricky Gervais, and now I was sort of doing stuff. Although I had a great team around me, it was sort of my thing, and I think probably I wasn't as secure in my decision making. So anyway, looking back, I feel sorry that it didn't work out, and apologize to you once more for it. But I think
it'll never be enough.
But I think
until we work together.
Well, exactly. But if it's any solace, it didn't last long on the air. So
yes,
none of us made a lot of money.
That does make me feel better about it.
But no, I think in retrospect, I feel like I probably didn't explain enough to you, which I apologize for.
No.
About how how it all went down.
I had one of those things where I came back to Jenny and I was like, I think I'm gonna be on this show with Stephen Merchant. And then 3 days later, I think I'm not gonna be on this show with Stephen Merchant, which is so show business.
Sure.
And it's a good lesson. I mean, honestly, it's a good lesson for all of us. Anyone pursuing this is nothing is real until you're on the set.
Well, I think now nothing is real until you're at the awards ceremony.
You're absolutely true. You're absolutely right.
I mean, shows now don't even...
Some of the networks keep the show. They don't even release the movie or the show.
Or they film it. Yeah, it's never seen. It's never seen at all.
I'm laughing so that I don't cry.
I know.
It is so painful. I know a handful of people who have filmed things and spent years of their lives on things, and the thing doesn't exist and can't even be seen.
Well, and there's a finite amount of years in your career, isn't there? And to have worked for 3 years on something and it just never is seen, it's like, I don't know how I would manage that.
It's so strange. So as I understand it, so when I was watching the British Office, which what's funny is Mabel, one of our producers, was pointing out that it is funny that people refer to it as the British Office. It's the Office, and then it's the American Office. Do you ever take umbrage of that?
Not at all. No. Because I've done too well out of the American Office to, as far as I'm concerned, that's the Office.
Oh my gosh. But I remember, I want to say it was in the 1990s when I watched The Office, and
2001, I think.
Oh, 2001, yeah. And I had the DVDs, because I think that was the only way we were even watching.
That's right,
it.
yeah.
In America, we were just handing them around to each other, and I remember watching the entire series and thinking, okay, Stephen Merchant and Ricky Gervais made this, and I literally, I think a lot of us who were in the dark and didn't know you and hadn't read much about you, we just thought, okay, I guess Ricky is more the comedian and Steven's maybe more the dramatist, and maybe that's how it merges. Meanwhile, you go on to make things that are really comedic, and then Ricky makes some stuff like Derek that's very dramatic.
Sure.
And so it's and so for me, I'm curious, what was the inside of that Rubik's Cube like?
Well, the first thing to say is that neither of us had done anything, really. We had met at a radio station, and we used to just goof around at the radio station behind the scenes. And, Ricky had some observations about office life that we kind of worked up. And then I got a job at the BBC as a trainee, so I abandoned him immediately and got this job at the BBC. And part of it was there was a training exercise to make a real documentary. Oh. And I said, could I do a fake documentary with my buddy? And we did what became a sort of Office demo tape, if you will.
Wow.
And it all just kind of came together. And so, he had a sort of innate talent, and I just had a kind of young, enthusiastic, sort of gung-ho, we can do anything approach. And so we sort of learned on the job, really. And we'd never directed, he'd never acted, we'd never written anything. And we just maybe because, again, it's the BBC and it was super low budget and they just gave us a chance.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that would work in the American system. I think probably you have to pay your dues more, right? Perhaps more so now they'll take a gamble on people. So in terms of how it worked in the, behind the scenes, we were just sort of figuring it out. I think I had studied film, so I probably had aspirations to the sort of dramaturg aspect of it, and I felt like I'd read some books on screenwriting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I thought, and whereas Ricky just had a sort of innate gut instinct for comedy and for this world because he'd worked a lot of time in an office. And so but I think it just kept on shifting the dynamic, between us.
I just feel like it was so meaningful for me personally and my artistic direction, my entire career, in the sense that I'm watching this comedy and I'm crying.
Right.
And for me, I'd experienced that in maybe some James L. Brooks films over the years, broadcast news, but I feel like I hadn't witnessed that in television. It seems like the ambition of it was beyond becoming television stars. Like, it feels like the ambition was artistic at its core.
I think it was, and I think we used to talk about this. If this was just the favorite thing of like a small group of people, we'd be happy. Like, we just had that. We were much more puritanical, I think, about the art of it than we've probably been since.
Yeah.
Because it was, I don't know, it's like your first album, right? Like you can, this has got to be the best it can be.
Well, it might be the only thing you ever make.
It might be the only thing you ever do, right? And so we were very ruthless about the mood of it, and that, I remember we sort of drained the color so it looked like a documentary that had been sitting on a shelf for 15 years and things like that, which don't seem like the obvious thing when you're doing a comedy, right?
Yes.
So yeah, there was a lot of discussions about that and the integrity of what would happen in front of a camera crew if it was a documentary.
Yeah.
Would they say that? Would they behave that way? We were very scrupulous.
In some ways, Extras, your follow-up series to that, was in some ways, it feels like a part two of that, of the filmmakers, because where it goes is these professional extras become successful.
Right. Yeah, well, that's right. Yes, it was essentially the idea of, write about what you know, right? And at that point, we'd had success with a TV show. So the second thing, the sort of difficult second album, was a show about making a show.
Yeah.
But I think we probably
and about the characters somewhat losing themselves.
Yes, and that I think it was that fear of what could have happened to us if we had made other choices.
Yeah.
Or if we had compromised in certain ways. But also I think about the absurdity of celebrity and of having now been in the show business world and seeing how bizarre it was, which is again something which many people have done before and since, but to us it was that experience we were having in that moment, and going to award shows and meeting famous people and all of the strange dynamics of that and the weirdness of it.
Well, what was the most shocking thing? Because you went from being someone who was working at the BBC as an assistant, to someone who was essentially a television star, hit television creator. It's like, what was the most shocking culture shock from one to the other?
Well, it was a slower burn for me because I was a writer before I was a performer. So it was the old idea of the frog in the pan of water, right? That's they're slowly heating it up and you don't realize you're being boiled alive. Yeah. So it wasn't like suddenly, oh my goodness. But I think it was when you started to discover that, like, we had Samuel L. Jackson in Extras because we'd heard that he'd seen the DVD and he liked it. And like you were saying, the idea that Sam Jackson's in his slippers at home, like peeling the cellophane off of a DVD, and like he needs a key to get it started, right? Because he can't get into the cellophane. Like, just that idea was crazy to us.
That is crazy.
And that then he would show up in England to do a cameo in our show. And the original idea was, wouldn't it be funny if they literally were extras in our show? And that you'd have Sam Jackson and Ben Stiller and Kate Winslet, but they never spoke.
Yes.
They would just walk by in the background. And then we thought, that's perverse.
Yes. Well, what's funny is when I was in college in the 90s, I made my first short film ever was called Extras.
Was it really?
It was about professional extras.
Had you
totally
been
fluky thing. I had been an extra during college. I was working as an extra, and my friends and I thought it was a really funny thing. My friends Chris and Ptolemy and I were like, let's make a short about this.
Are you about to bring lawyers in?
Sir?
Yes, come in.
Chancellor?
So I'm going to take out my sleepwalking material on my new set. I think.
Please. By the way, you walked through a plate glass window at a party.
Yeah, you're right. I did. I know.
Tell the truth.
I did.
What happened?
Were you there, Mike?
I wasn't there, but like I heard about it.
Yeah. I was I wasn't even invited. A friend of mine.
That you wanted to get in.
Yeah, I just wanted.
There was only one entry.
No, I went to a party thrown by Sarah Silverman, who I didn't know at the time, and I'd gone was a friend of a friend, and I got to the party, and it was in Los Angeles, and I think she throws the party most years, and she had I think some weed chocolate or something, that was there, and I thought, she's a relatively petite lady. I'm a 6'7" man. I should be able to eat some, weed chocolate and I'll be fine. But not realizing that she's got the constitution of Willie Nelson, and I've got the constitution of like an 8-year-old girl, and I immediately this hit me. And I just felt like I fell back inside my own body, and I felt like I was peeking out of my own eyes, just trying to figure out what was going on. And anyway, to cut a long story short, I thought I should get outside for a breath of air. And I remember thinking there was a swimming pool. There was a swimming pool behind a plate glass door. I thought, don't fall in the pool. Whatever you do, don't fall in the pool. And I didn't. I neglected to observe this glass door.
Don't fall in the pool.
And I just walked straight through the window, and it smashed in its entirety. And I found myself outside the party looking back in. And you realize at that moment that you've not been primed for that moment.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like no one, your mother never says, by the way, if you walk through a window at a party full of celebrities,
step one,
this is what you do. So yeah, it was just.
Were you okay?
I had one minor cut. You can see a minor scar on my hand and a little cut on my head or a bruise on my head, and otherwise I was fine. It was insane. I don't know how. Although subsequently, lots of people who were there have told me, Rashomon style, different perspectives on it. And one of them was that I tripped on a cable and fell backwards through the window. So whereas I was worried, I was fearful for a while that Sarah might sue me. I think I could sue her, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Let's get that
we just
going.
reached an impasse.
Sir, come on back in.
Come back in.
This episode becomes a series of lawsuits.
That's right.
We're just doing paperwork by the end.
But it's so funny because I remember the first person I saw looking back at me was the roastmaster, Jeff Ross. And even he looked concerned. Even he was like, there's no jokes in this. This guy could be seriously injured.
That's a shocking experience. How recently had you moved to Los Angeles?
I don't think I'd even moved there. I think I was just there for meetings or something. And but it's funny, isn't it? Because this is the comedy writer brain. Even as it had happened, there was part of me thinking, there's an anecdote in this.
People always ask that. When can something go from tragedy to comedy? And it's like instantly.
Well, I think
as a comedian, it's instant.
I remember being on Kimmel not long after and telling the story. So I very swiftly it became an anecdote. Yeah.
That is that's a shocking one. It's so funny because it is that thing where you're Stephen Merchant, you have something of a screen persona, even in Outlaws, you're playing an awkward variation on yourself of sorts. But also you have to live in that body and do what you do.
Yeah.
And think what you think. And people, and sometimes I think people forget that about celebrities who are awkward in television and movies and in their stand-up. And they are awkward in their lives.
Well, that's the thing. But I didn't realize I was as awkward as my screen persona until recently, where I started looking back on my life. And I'm like, there are so many times where things like this have happened that I thought I was sort of slightly manufacturing that persona, but that is me.
No, isn't it amazing? I had one recently. I was walking on the street. A guy looks behind. A guy says to the guy in front of me, "You have an undercover cop behind you," and he looks back at me, and I look behind me, and there's no one there, and I just go. I literally said to the guy, "I go, no." Which is what an undercover cop would say. And that was the moment where I realized my look is narc. I just look like a narc, and there's nothing I can do about it.
But what did you think that your look was?
I don't know. I think I always think of it as I had one vain period in my life, which was like age 17.
Yeah.
Where I had someone who I thought was cool paid a lot of attention to me, and so I went through a period where I was like doing push-ups every night.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it was outrageous.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that phase lasted about 6 months, and it was I wish upon no one spending time with me in that period of time.
You've reminded me of when I was about 21, 22. I took a picture into a barber shop of Christian Slater.
Okay.
And I said, I want a haircut like this. I want
How
to look
old
like
were
this.
you?
20, 21.
Okay.
Like I said, I want to look like this. And he did the haircut. And then I looked at myself in the mirror and Christian, I said, I don't look like this. And he went, I think it's the cheekbones more than the haircut.
Exactly.
But in my mind, I'm like, well, I just get the hair. I'll be fine, right?
Well, it's amazing because as comedians, it is almost a mandate to look within.
Yes.
You know, it's almost a mandate to stare at your own flaws.
Yes.
And go, how could this be funny?
Yes.
And even then, we're missing things.
Of course, that you need other people to flag to you, because I never used to. I am still convinced that I'm not a weird guy.
Okay,
you know what I mean? Like I'm convinced I'm normal and everyone else is eccentric.
Yep.
But I know that's wrong.
Yeah.
But in my mind, I don't feel I'm a man with a lot of demons.
Yes.
I crave demons.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it would make me funnier, more creative, more interesting.
Yeah.
It would give me more fuel.
Yeah.
But clearly, I must have them because otherwise I wouldn't be doing the job I'm doing. Why are we getting on stage in front of people? What are we chasing? What am I pursuing? There must be things there that are driving that. I've never done therapy because I think I'm worried about opening that door and seeing what's in there. But again, I go about myself thinking, that guy was weird.
Yeah.
You know, I'll walk away from something, whereas it's almost certainly me.
I think part of it dates back with a lot of us to just childhood, parts of childhood that we don't really remember.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this a lot lately because my daughter's 9, and I always think about like which stuff does she remember and which stuff doesn't she remember.
Right, yes.
And both things are significant in relation to who you are and who you become.
Well, as you said, I'm pushing 7 foot.
Yeah.
I'm 6'7", and I've been very tall from a young age. And someone said to me once in an interview, do you think that you went into comedy as a way of controlling when other people laugh at you?
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember thinking, all right, slow down. It's a bit presumptuous.
All right, slow down.
Yeah. But in retrospect, there's almost certainly some truth to that. If people are going to look at you anyway...
Well, and you even do it in Outlaws where someone calls you like a beanstalk or something.
Right. Oh, we've got a whole... I asked the writers that I work with to come up with a string of insults for me.
What are they?
We had others. We had albino E.T. on stilts, pedo Harry Potter.
Albino E.T.
On stilts.
On stilts. That's good.
Yeah. Haunted pencil. That was one of them.
Haunted pencil. Oh, that is just cruel.
Yeah.
I think you're a great storyteller.
Well, that's something I'm really trying to lean into in the stand-up.
And I feel like when I talk to you conversationally, I'm like, oh, well, this person could do a knockout hour of storytelling and get into the types of feelings that you have in your all your TV work because there, you obviously have such deep feelings.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and that's definitely something I've just gone back to stand-up recently, and there are a lot of stories in there, and this is something I wanted to talk to you, if I can just take this opportunity,
please,
for free.
Yeah.
You as a master storyteller,
Oh.
do you feel there's no story that can't be turned into a bit? Because I feel like there are stories I have, and however I tell them, I can't quite make them land for whatever reason, and I'm interested to know whether you feel like there is just some things that, for whatever reason, they'll just never quite work
as stage-worthy bits.
Yeah.
I guess the question is, it's funny. The last night I said on stage this line that I sometimes talk about with comedy in general, which is I think that comedy is a Venn diagram of what you think is funny and what the audience thinks is funny. And if you can find that stuff in between, then that's where sort of the magic is. And I always think of my jokes and stories as being of that. And I literally said it on stage. I've never said it on stage. I said it to the audience because something didn't work. And I go, I think of comedy like a Venn diagram. And I go, and that was an example of where we disagree about whether something is funny.
Yes.
I thought it was funny. You guys don't. That's fine. You're perfectly entitled to your opinion. But I also think I think there's two approaches. If you have a story that isn't working, there is kind of a reframing of it. Mm-hmm. Like what's not in the frame that could give more context so that they're in my brain.
Yes.
So that's one version of it. And the other version of it is, no, it's just not going to work. You know what I mean? But that's also good. That's also good because it's freeing. You go, no,
But do you feel there are stories or opinions or ideas that you can't get across because they don't chime with people's perception of you? Because I've noticed
100%, but I think that you can get around.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a framing thing. You can zoom out and go, let me tell you something about myself that you probably don't perceive. You're probably looking at me thinking I'm a beanstalk of a man and I'm awkward and I'm this and I'm that. Right. But actually, in certain situations, I do pretty well.
I'm a James Bond.
Yeah. I'm a James Bond situation. Yeah, character. And then you can go into it.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a joke years ago where I talk about bombing at this charity golf tournament for cancer, and I felt terrible about it. And I tell a joke thinking I'm going to make the situation better. I tell a joke about cancer because I had cancer.
Right.
and it just gets worse. And then I say, before I tell you this part of the story, I want to point out, you're on my side, which is just completely hangs a lantern on like obviously you're not gonna be, but let's try, And I think sometimes as comedians, I think we forget how much we can openly discuss what is happening, which is I am a person telling a group of strangers some stuff.
Yes. Acknowledge the because it's a weird artifice anyway, isn't it?
Yeah,
that you've ambled on stage, seemingly just talking off the top of your head, even though you've carefully cultivated it over a year.
Yes.
Yeah,
if not years.
Yeah,
if not years. But do you want to go over one of those?
Well, I have a story that is a true story that happened years ago, and even as I begin to tell it, I feel like this might be a confusing aspect, because before I did anything else, a friend of mine was working on a TV show. They had got hold of some outtakes and bloopers from porn movies.
Okay.
And they had somehow got a commission where they could get 2 shows out of these outtakes and bloopers on late night TV.
Okay.
And they needed to pad it out. They didn't have enough for a whole half-hour show. So they needed someone to go to LA and interview porn stars.
Okay.
To pad out this show. In between the bloopers, they'd have me talking to whoever it was.
Would it be a comedy show?
Yes, a kind of comedy show, a kind of blooper show, like America's Funniest Home Videos, but they're porno.
Except porn, yeah.
Anyway, so a friend of mine said, would you want to do it? And I'd never done much anything. I was just doing a little comedy on the circuit. I said, sure. So they flew me to LA, and I met porn stars and I interviewed them. And one of the homes I went to was this porn couple in the valley. And I went in, and they at the time, this was how long ago it was, they were live streaming from different rooms in their house. And their fans would go online. And the porn star and her husband, she would go online, and her fans would say what they were into, that what they wanted to see her do, and she would act that out, either with her husband or people that came round the house.
Okay.
And I was there, bear in mind, as just an observer with a camera crew. So I'm there, and I'm sitting next to her at one point while she's talking to her fans, and they start insulting me, like, why am I looking at this guy, this albino ET on stilts or whatever, why am I looking at this guy? And I got angry, so I wrote back. I'm like, how am I the loser? You're the one sat at home with your pants around your ankles.
Back.
I'm furious. Anyway, her husband appears, and he starts sort of making out with her and fondling her, and they just disappear upstairs. And I'm just sitting in their living room, again, not knowing the etiquette. Like, what do you do in that situation? Do you make yourself a cup of tea? And eventually the husband appears. He goes, "You're coming upstairs."
Oh, no.
So I go upstairs, and now she's on the bed, pleasuring herself, and he's filming it, and it's streaming live on the web to the fans, right?
Okay.
And he says to me, I'm going to join in. He hands me the camera. Now I'm a pornographer, right? Like, now I'm filming this, right? And
This is a fantastic story.
and she's, now they're getting down to it. And I'd never been to an orgy or anything.
You'd never even seen sex.
I'd never even seen sex. I didn't even know what was going on. And so I'm filming this, and I'm starting to think, like, what angles do people want? And, like, should I be zooming in? And then I remember the nerds online who'd been insulting me.
God.
So I turned the camera away from them and just pointed it at the wall.
Oh,
and they're like paying $15 an hour. I'm like, they're not going to see anything. This is my payback.
This is cruel.
Anyway, so that's what happened. That's the genuine story that happened.
Right.
But when I tell it on stage, people don't really go with it. Either they don't believe it, or they think, oh, well, you're in show business, so you were making a show and it was bound to be funny. Like, for whatever reason, they can't dial into it in the way that you just did because it's true or whatever. And so that's one where I just can't find the framing of it.
Okay. I'm going to make a recommendation, which is to wean out the show business from it.
Yeah.
And just be like...
But then why am I there?
I had this job years ago, and they asked me if I would interview these porn stars.
Yeah.
And I showed up. I don't know that much about porn. And then I would even potentially go into some jokes about porn that express your POV on porn.
Mm-hmm. But do I need to give a reason for what job would that be?
I think you could be a reporter. You could be a radio reporter. I mean, like, I don't think you owe it to the audience to give them the context that is what the New York Times would give.
Yes.
I really don't think you owe them that.
Yes. Yes.
And it's like, in my experience, the less that people have to think about the mechanics of how you arrive somewhere, the better, usually. And so I would just come up with a conceit that is a little bit of a fudge of the truth that maybe is an amalgam of your past. You worked in radio. I was an assistant on a radio show.
Yeah.
And they were covering a porn thing, and then I was in this house where they were live streaming porn, and then people started mocking me.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm in.
Because that's a good example, I think, where if we were working on a script or a screenplay, and we were trying to fold a narrative, a real story into a narrative.
Yeah.
I would be able to pull my perspective out.
Yes.
And and adjust where it needs and how we change it. And I when I'm writing a script, a TV or movie script like that, I can. But for some reason, when it's my real life in stand up, it's much harder for me to get that bigger view on it.
Ira Glass has this great thing, which is about stories, which is you do a little bit of story, and then how you feel about what's happening, and then a little more story, and then how you feel about it.
Sure.
And comedians, we have this superpower, which is the how we're feeling is jokes.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's kind of a score. Like, I think that story is a riot. And I think I guarantee you that will work. I think what it's lacking is an intro, and I think it's lacking an outro. I think where it lands is not enough to be an ending yet. What's a capper, like, in other words, like, in hindsight, is there anything you learned from it?
Well, the other idiosyncrasies of that story were...
Or why does it stick in your mind?
Well, because it was the domesticity meets the sort of seediness, if you like.
Yeah.
Or that was
like they were a couple.
That they were a couple.
And that was their house.
It was their house.
Yeah.
And what was odd, I remember, is that she was a porn star and he was a former NASA scientist.
Oh my gosh.
I remember, like, how did they meet? Like, what mixer is that?
Oh, that's lovely.
And also,
that's
I remember
a great detail.
They
by
were
the way.
very open with me, but they didn't want the neighbors to know.
Oh, really?
They were very worried about if I did a piece to camera outside the house that the neighbors would ask, what you're doing? And I'd say I was just interviewing the porn stars.
I could see that.
Which I thought was how do you keep that hidden?
That's a hard one to keep hidden. I used to have this joke, which is about when people make homemade porn. I'm always shocked because after I have sex, all I can think is at least no one saw that. I'm never
right,
like,
yes.
I'm never like, how were we not rolling? And then go again. It's going to be 40 minutes. Yeah, but yeah. But I think that those are interesting facts. You're saying one of them was a NASA engineer?
He said he'd been a NASA scientist or a NASA engineer. Yeah, and I don't know how they'd met.
Yeah.
My big concern is, are they still together? You know,
are
they
they?
seem
Yeah,
very
yeah.
sweet.
No,
They
that is a big concern. I mean, does it relate to your relationship you're in now?
Well, she's not a porn star.
No,
and
that's not what I'm
I don't
asking.
understand science. I'd never get a job at NASA.
What's the thematic? What is the thematic?
I mean, we're both in show business.
I mean, there is maybe a capper of just like, I found the whole thing very relatable. You know what I mean?
Yes, yeah.
Like,
right,
for being so outside of my own experience,
Yeah.
I did find it pretty relatable. They had a house.
Yeah,
They
right.
they were worried about the neighbors.
Yeah.
You know, I think maybe something in
I
that.
do remember thinking that it was that there was a lot of what appeared to be wipe clean surfaces.
Oh, yes.
Like it was a very immaculate
Yes.
place because I guess it's on camera all the time.
Yeah.
You know, you can't have kids' toys and clothes on a dryer.
I think something in that space of how you found it relatable could be a capper because it's a 180 of where we were at the beginning.
Yeah, right.
Because you're fish out of water. I mean, really, it's a fish out of water
Absolutely.
story. It's the gawky albino ET
okay.
in porn. I'm repeating precisely what you
Slow
said.
down.
Your
Slow
words. and I'll say it slower. It's an albino ET on stilts in a world of pornography.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, and maybe honestly, maybe it comes back there as you call back that joke.
Yeah.
And then say, and somehow I found it relatable. You know what I mean? Because I do think like that it's the fish out of water, and then it's almost like, what's the surprise where ET connects?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's right. Yeah.
It's like they're
very much the Elliot of the story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's they're the Elliot of the story. Yeah, there maybe is something in that.
Yeah.
Because I think the story at its core is hilarious. And I just think, beginning and ending. I think, ending, of course, is, I just think ending is the most crucial.
It's so hard. That's the thing, which is often hard with a real life story, because a real life story often doesn't have a natural, what you might term, payoff in the stand-up sense.
I mean, the other thing is like, it's, 20 years later, 30 years later, and you're still thinking about it.
Sure.
So it's like, what is there?
Yeah.
What's that? Why?
Yeah.
Because the why sometimes. Like, why are we still thinking about that?
Yes.
And
why is
and
that?
maybe it's like and I think, why do I think about this? Well, it's relatable. My wife has this. Whatever the thing is.
Right. It's relatable.
We're not porn stars, but
Yeah. But we keep our house tidy.
Yeah. We keep a tidy house. We're worried about the neighbors.
We're worried about the what the
yeah.
neighbors think of us. That's right. Yeah. Well, thank you for your help on that, though. I feel like that. Yeah, I'll keep working on that.
So you've been doing stand-up. What else are you kind of obsessed with right now?
Stand-up wise?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I don't know if I'm saying this as a bit or if I'm saying this truthfully. I think it's a bit of both. I feel like one of my problems as a stand-up is I don't have a lot of opinions. Or what I should say more is that I'm quite a centrist person. I can see most sides of an argument. So when I see someone as brilliant as Bill Burr,
which is what a dramatist is.
right, but
Which is where you come from.
But with drama, I can create a sort of nemesis
Yes.
in the narrative to create both sides of the
Sure.
opinion, and now I've got a drama and I've got a friction to it, right?
Absolutely.
Whereas if you're a great stand-up who's got a very distinct point of view, I'm thinking of someone like Bill Burr, who's sort of whether he's like that in real life or not, he manifests a sort of anger or frustration at the world, which seems very real. And so he's constantly in conflict with the world in one form or another, or with people in the world, or with attitudes or whatever. And so there's a dialectic, to use the Marxist term, straight away, right? Whereas I don't. It doesn't. So I have a dialectic with just not walking through windows,
Right.
or the awkwardness of walking into a porn star's house,
Yes.
because I'm a fish out of water in those situations. But if you ask me my opinions on the classic sort of stand-up material, I find it hard to get frustrated with, I don't know, whatever it might be, cab drivers,
Right.
Or, like, it's a manufactured artifice if I start,
But I don't think that stand-up comedy has to take one side. Like, I think the most interesting comics are
in the gray.
well, they're taking all the sides. Like, if you look at George Carlin, he's he's typically making a case for one thing and then poking holes in it in Act 2.
Sure.
And then maybe presenting a third thing in Act 3 that's entirely different. And I think like, or Gary Shandling, or, you know, countless other comedians. I mean, I'm always trying to do that. I'm always trying to take, in my new hour right now, it's a lot about, that I'm touring with, is a lot about, you know, being someone who's been married 15 years and I have a 9-year-old daughter, and vast majority of my life is this domestic life. It's the mundane. And it is finding in that what are the contradictions in it? What are the perspectives from other people? What drives me crazy? And then what can I imagine drives other people crazy about me? And I think both of those things are cathartic when you can do them right.
Yeah.
It's like Jenny and I were watching this PBS documentary about William Carlos Williams the other day, and he has that famous poem about plums. And they were talking about how it's the simplest and most mundane thing. And of course, he was a doctor. He's like a full-time doctor, and then he was writing poems. Yeah. And he, in a lot of ways, had sort of a mundane life in a full-time job and family. And yet, the plums, he finds it in this thing. Yeah. And I don't think that that's a take. Sure. It's a Bill Burr-esque take per se. I think if you're vivid enough with what you're painting for the audience, you can bring them somewhere special.
Now you talk about it, I have another story. So maybe this is an interesting territory, because I have another story where so my dad was a builder and a plumber. Yeah. And he was kind of more of a man's man, you know, like he's the sort of guy that would come home from work and have a wash in the sink. Okay. You know, or take an adjustable wrench on holiday.
Walk me through that. What's a wash in a sink?
You come home, you're like, you know, you're just like, you're not running a shower. You're like running the water in the sink and just splashing your face and under the arms. You know,
I know nothing of this.
Yeah. And so he's more of a man's man. I was never that person. But whenever I was around people from the construction world or anything like that, I felt a need to put on a kind of air of what we call blokiness in the UK. Okay, feeling like I wasn't some, you know, highfalutin kid who'd been to university who was trying to be a writer. Like I felt a need to be one of the boys. Right. Anyway, so I'm doing some work early on in my life. I was having my apartment redone, and I had to buy some glass for a window, for an internal window. And my dad said, go up to this guy that I know, you know, and buy the glass. And so I got up to this place, this store, but I just put on this act. Like I don't want him to know that I'm. So I start and I kind of walk in and I'm like pretending to chew gum.
Pretending to chew gum.
Like, and I'm like, you know, and I'm saying, trying to make conversation, you know, about sort of.
Pretending to chew gum is a bit for sure.
Oh, did you see the big sports game last night? You know, whatever it was. And so I walk in and the guy sort of looks at me and I walk over to this glass that's all kind of stacked up. Yeah. And I pull out a sheet of glass because I'm looking to see if it's the one. And the guy says, "Be careful. You know, you might cut yourself." I went, "I'm all right, Chief." And I looked at my hand and there was a huge gash through my hand. Like it just cut open.
Wait.
Because of the glass. Because I just cut my hand.
Oh my gosh.
Me and glass.
Yeah.
And so now I'm looking at my hand. And like you say, my first thought should be, I need to ask this man for help. But instead, I'm thinking, I don't want him to think I've cut myself.
Oh, God.
So I put my hand in my pocket.
Yeah.
And I say, he says, "Is that the piece you want?" I went, "I think so." And so he puts on a giant leather glove, like a sort of medieval, you know, blacksmith. And comes out and pulls the glass out. I'm like, of course, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so, and I've got my hand in my pocket, and I can feel it sort of bleeding into my pocket. And he sort of wraps it up for me and things. And then I have to sign the credit card slip, but I can't. Now I have to use my left hand, and I can. But I also don't want to take my hand out of my pocket to hold the slip. Yeah. And so again, the whole thing is not wanting to embarrass myself. Yeah. Instead of being genuinely concerned about the blood that's pouring into my leg.
That's a great story. Have you done that on stage?
No.
That's great.
Really. Yeah.
I think that you probably have 40 stories like that.
I'm sure I do.
Is the truth.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, it's a matter of putting them on stage, seeing to go back to the Venn diagram, seeing what is the thing that is like lightning between you and an audience, and going and then collecting those stories and then just going, what is this about? I mean, to me, I'm from the 30,000 foot view. I'm going like, well, it's in some ways a story about you and your dad. Because in some ways you view your dad as this person you look up to, but he's so different from you.
Yeah.
And there's potentially just a lot there. Yeah. This is from someone who's performing a show around the world about my dad.
Sure. Yes.
Currently. And so all of our advice is all reflective of where we're at. But yeah, I think about that a lot. Here's my hypothesis on the history of television in the last 30 years.
Oh, okay.
Tell me where I'm right and wrong. I think about Spinal Tap inspired Gary Shandling to make Larry Sanders.
Yep.
I feel like you and Ricky Gervais must have been inspired by Larry Sanders and or Spinal Tap,
both.
Possibly.
Definitely both, yeah.
Then the American Office is, of course, inspired by the British Office, Greg Daniels. And then Modern Family is inspired by The Office. And then that's kind of like every television show right now.
Right.
Which is kind of the single camera documentary style, shooting style, which it's no small thing. It has entirely replaced what used to be the multicam studio audience sitcom. And now it is how television shows are made. And you're a massive part, because you're bridging the gap from Spinal Tap, as far as I can tell, which is in the 70s or 80s, to the 2000s.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Do you think that's right or wrong?
Well, firstly, you reminded me that I did a guest spot on Modern Family, and one of the people on the crew said, not realizing who I was, said, "Hey, the unique thing about this show is it's shot like it's a documentary."
Oh my God.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, cool. But are you just finding like a specific through line though? I mean, there is presumably a lot of other shows which don't have that style. Or do you think that...
Most do.
Do you think it is? Yeah, it's certainly...
It's a rarity that there's a multicam sitcom.
Well, I remember, I talked to you earlier about how Ricky and I were very diligent about the sort of authenticity of the documentary and what would be filmed in front of a documentary and so on. And part of that was how long would, in theory, a documentary crew be in an office,
Good
right,
point.
before it was aired. And I remember us saying when they were developing the American version to Greg, well, how are you going to... If this runs to like 9 seasons, why is this camera team still there? And has it been aired? And are they now famous? And he said at some point it will just become the style of the show. And he was right. It just became the style of the show. And you weren't asking by series 4, oh, it's a documentary and are they well known and is this on TV? It just was the style of the show. And at some point, I think those other shows are that. It's just the style of the show. So whereas we wouldn't go home with the characters, because why would a camera team be in your bedroom?
Yeah.
Whereas Modern Family can be anywhere at any time, and it's just the style, right?
I mean, I like all those shows we're referencing. It is a pet peeve.
That they can go behind closed doors.
No conceit.
Right.
The to-camera interview, it always takes me out of it.
Really?
Unless it's like your show.
Yeah.
Where it's a documentary.
Yeah.
And I'm always just like, you can work a little harder with the conceit there.
No, I think it's just a style now. It's just...
I know, but also, come on. What are we doing?
But in terms of sort of... we certainly were influenced by Spinal Tap and Larry Sanders. But bizarrely, although they were in our heads more when we came to make the show. Like I say, it originated because I had this documentary team for one day.
Oh, yeah.
And I was supposed to be making a real documentary.
Yeah.
And so we did a fake one instead. And so the talking heads and the being interviewed was because we could fill up more screen time by having someone be interviewed.
Well, this goes to a question I have, which is usually a slow round question about advice. Like, what advice, would you give or would you hand off? When I look at The Office or when I look at Broad City, there's a lot of shows where a creator just made a thing for no money, no budget, and then someone goes, no, let's give that person a shot. What advice would you give for someone who's at step 1 of that?
Well, I'm jealous of the fact that nowadays the access to cameras and good sound and good editing is on people's phones. I mean, it's crazy.
It's unbelievable.
And when I think back to when I was, a teenager or in my early 20s filming stuff at college, to get hold of editing equipment, we had like 2 VCRs that were, it was painful to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And so to get anything made was such a challenge, and you needed help and you needed equipment. And so I feel like if we were doing The Office now, I suspect we would have shot that ourselves, and edited ourselves, and not even had that BBC camera team for a day, because you've got it's like the band that's writing the songs for the first album, right?
Yeah.
You'll never have more freedom, more time.
That's right.
Than before someone pays you to do a thing.
That's right. Yes.
You can work, and it's only your drive, your time, your ambition to workshop it with your friends, and there's always people around that will act in something, that will help you. They're eager to do it. People want to get involved in stuff, and it's just up to you to make it happen.
This is great advice.
Yeah.
What and to someone listening to this who isn't doing that but knows they should do that, what's your advice?
Well, it's difficult when let's say you have a 9-to-5 job and you're trying to pay bills. Yes, I understand it's hard to carve out time, but you can do it. Many of us, I did a full-time job and then went off and did stand-up in the evenings. I'm sure you were the same.
Yeah.
You can find the time if you want it. And the idea of making excuses that's not an excuse. If you want to do it enough, you'll find the time. My dad built a house at the weekends while working a regular job in the week.
Oh, wow.
For 2.5 years, it took him to build a house with his father and his uncle.
Wow.
So you can kind of do anything if you put your mind to it. And so I think it's just do it. There's no excuse.
You got to do it.
Just do it.
But so the person listening to this is probably going, "Oh, what if I fail?"
Well,
what does Stephen Merchant say to that person?
I always think about that idea of the sort of guy down the bar saying, I could have been heavyweight champion of the world. But did you get in the ring? Did you do any boxing? I did it twice. But it was the politics of it, man.
Yeah,
the guy in the gym didn't like me.
It's the politics of it, yeah.
It's like you'll never know if you're a heavyweight champion until you try. And so, of course, you might fail. You might fail horribly, but you might not. I mean, I look back now, I'm like, I don't know where I got this confidence. Why on earth did I think... My hero when I was growing up was John Cleese from Monty Python and Fawlty Towers. And he grew up not far from my hometown of Bristol. He was tall like me. And somewhere as a teenager, I'm like, well, if they want tall guys from this neighborhood...
They clearly want tall.
I can do that for them.
It's clearly been a huge advantage in your career. Have you ever thought about shortening surgery? Some people do get that. They cut off,
It's a brand at this point, Mike.
Yeah, they cut off their heel and then they cut out about 4 inches and they put the feet there.
It's my thing,
Oh yeah, I get it. It's a signature. It's a calling card.
Exactly.
What is there a group that wouldn't let you in when you were a kid?
I don't know that they wouldn't let me in, but I felt I was never quite a member of any group. I felt like I drifted between groups.
Yeah.
I would skirt by and they'd be like, "Hey," but I wasn't I wasn't in the inner circle.
I relate to that. Was there one in particular where you were like, "Come on, you should let me in"?
I think it was just, I feel like there were Friday evenings where I was thinking, someone will call. They'll tell me where it's happening. They'll tell me where the party's at.
Call.
And they didn't.
Oh,
and I'm
relate to someone will call so much.
But it wasn't that you were unpopular.
Yeah.
I feel like it was,
forgotten.
You just weren't in their thoughts.
You were forgotten.
Yeah.
No, someone will call could be the title of your special. Because I think that's a deep feeling.
Yes.
Of just being excluded, not in like an aggro way.
Not a malicious
but
thing.
just a casual, someone will call.
Yeah.
And they don't call. What's your least favorite nickname you've had?
I don't think about a nickname, but do you know what? I tried to get myself a nickname. When I was maybe 13 or 14, I thought it'd be cool to have a nickname. And so I tried to get one going. And so I came into school and I said to my friends, everyone's calling me Spud now.
Oh, God.
Which I don't know if you use that term here. It's like a slang term for potato.
Yeah, sure.
So, and they went, "No, they're not." And I'm like, "No, you're right." They were like, who would be calling you that except us,
Oh
and
my
we're
gosh.
not. So it's not a thing. And I'm like, you're right, it's not a thing.
People are saying, people are calling me Spud.
No, they're not.
This is I mean, it's kind of no further questions, Your Honor. It's just like, you're great.
Well, thank you so much.
You're a legend for a reason.
It was a real pleasure. I really feel like you've helped me with this stand-up show. I really appreciate it, man.
That's great. I mean,
but you're not going to ask for money or anything.
Yeah,
like, the lawyers are the lawyers coming in?
Here come the lawyers. Sir, can you enter there? There's a gentleman. You'll fill out some paperwork. It's a W-9. It's a simple thing. It might be confusing with the currency exchange, but the no, it's I think that the key to your stand-up hour is going to be ripping open your soul and revealing to the audience what I think you have a bit of a Brit kind of reserved way about you. And I think that if you can come on stage and reveal yourself as that person and then just tip it one tick into how you feel deep down underneath that, I think that could be the magic that your television shows have.
Thank you, Mike.
The last thing is working out for a cause. Is there a nonprofit you enjoy contributing to or you think does a good job?
Well, there's a hospice that I do a lot of things for in my hometown of Bristol where my grandmother passed away. So St. Peter's Hospice, I often direct people towards that.
Okay. So we will contribute to St. Peter's Hospice. We will link to them in the show notes. And Stephen, I'm just thrilled that we met many years ago. Your network rejected me to play the role that you wanted me to play. And I think we'll work on something.
Yeah, I hope so. I feel like we're very simpatico is my gut instinct.
Yeah, I don't appreciate your pronunciation of simpatico, but I know what you mean. All right, until the next time.